Illusion magic is probably the hardest type of magic to get right in fantasy, especially in fantasy games. The issue lies in the difficulty of presenting asymmetrical sets of information to multiple characters, without any player feeling tricked and any intelligent character seeming obviously stupid. It's a really tricky balance to pull off, and this video will offer absolutely no help to anyone struggling from that particular issue. Because I believe that the best and most popular and most efficient way to use magic that involves conjuring images in the air is not for tricking people, but in logistics, imaging, planning, and measuring things in a way more accurate than should be possible in any pre-industrial world. To demonstrate my point, as I usually do in this series, I'm going to be looking at one Dungeons & Dragons spell, the most basic of illusion spells in D&D, minor illusion. But also, as usual, a lot of these practical applications are in no way necessitated by the spell. They are possibilities that could be achieved with any setting's illusion magic. These ideas are broadly applicable whatever game or magic mechanic system you are using. There is one aspect, one idea here that does rely on a slightly gamified interpretation of the minor illusion spell specifically from D&D, but other than that, everything should be fair game for anyone. So no matter whether you play D&D or not, I intend to prove today that illusions need not be the tool of the trickster, but they may well be the lifeblood of the creative and crafting industries and much, much more. We're going to start with the most immediately applicable technique: layout and planning. This may be obvious, but with parchment at a premium and work crews being in most fantasy worlds largely illiterate, it's highly unlikely that each person involved in the construction of a large project would have access to all of the information about how that project was going to work, how it was going to hold up mechanically, and what it was going to look like in the end. They may not even know what their daily task is supposed to look like when finished, as a broad part of the whole. Even if you lay out on the floor an entire floor plan of the structure before you even start construction, that is just one-dimensional. A scale model with the detail of a technical drawing, but in 3 dimensions shown to everyone working on a project or a section of a project before work begins. That's an incredible resource for any work crew, especially if that scale model can then be altered according to collaborative feedback. This would also be a massive boon to patrons of the arts as well, who can be shown a mock-up of the art piece that they will hopefully eventually get if they sponsor a particular artist. And again, it allows for tweaks and edits to the image's composition before the artist ever has to put paintbrush to canvas. Okay, but how do we ensure that these model paintings or model statues or model buildings are actually to any scale at all, and not some sort of artistic representation of what the vibe is of a building? It's not terribly useful as a template for an artist if there's no precision there. I will say though, a non-scale model even would be pretty damn useful. You'd still get that kind of collaborative feedback, but things like battle plans and all of that can be broadly communicated using imprecise environmental details, as long as people get the broad gist. But let's sort this question of scale anyway. To do this, we're going to need to get more into the gamified aspects of magic. In Dungeons & Dragons, minor illusion, the most basic illusion spell, can create visual or auditory information within 30 feet of its caster. A sound that can be no louder than the volume of a scream, and a visual object that can be no larger than a 5 foot by 5 foot by 5 foot cube. It's this second limitation, the space-based limitation, that makes minor illusion incredible. To be honest, it doesn't have to be 5 foot cubes. It could be any spatial limit, as long as the size limit is consistent across all castings of the spell, and as long as your spellcasting system isn't like purely personal or based solely on personal power, the amount of stuff someone can do. With any form of magic that is universalized, learned by everyone in the same way, any sort of fixed limit is a universal standard, a magically fixed reference point. A spell can only lift a certain weight. Well, now you have a magical scale that tells you if something is exactly that weight. And an illusion being limited to a specific sized cube is no different, except infinitely more useful than a spell that can determine if something is a specific weight. A 5-foot length, and frankly any division you can imagine thereof, would quickly become the defining, magically reinforced universal measurement across any D&D world, any world that has this sort of magic in it. Especially because D&D's minor illusion can also be cast without expending any sorts of magical resources. Let me detail exactly how this works. First, on a basic level, anyone who can cast minor illusion can be employed to check the size of anything perfectly, as long as it's 5 feet or smaller on each side. All they must do is align their 5-foot illusion cube on or over or near the object and conjure an illusion of, say, a ruler with a bunch of gradations equally spaced, let's say 500 gradations. Or better, a full 3-dimensional cube grid of lines to help measure more unusual objects and their shape in space. All you need to do is line up the object with these measuring tools, or this grid. And lining an object up well with these gradations, or this grid, enables you to measure to any precision that can be perceived by the human eye. You just need to add more grid lines to your illusion, perfectly equally spaced, of course. You could even make a cube of rulers if you'd so desire, or one ruler that's up to 7 feet long if you use the hypotenuse of the cube of illusion. But there's a small flaw here. A skilled illusionist could easily make their illusion box slightly smaller than 5 feet in every direction. Because remember, the illusion just needs to fit in this 5 foot by 5 foot by 5 foot space. All they'd need to do is make it imperceptibly smaller without a specific reference to go against, or to make the graduations of their measuring clump up slightly or spread out slightly in the area they're wanting to measure. You could thereby intentionally mismeasure or misappropriate the dimensions of, say, a precious object. Or you could sabotage a construction project by giving a slightly wrong scale to some of the workers. This is where controls come in. A guild of skilled illusionists could easily set themselves up as an inspectorate authority on measurements, using their mastery of their illusions to measure things like gemstones, or do safety inspections of construction sites, mock-ups of stable arches, that sort of thing. If their word is trusted enough, then any hay bale, statue, or bolt of silk is likely to go through a member of this guild for verification, leading to a world where fraud is significantly more difficult. They would even likely be used in measuring livestock in both breeding and slaughtering capacities, too, as using illusions to measure things is a very non-invasive, non-contact system of getting the size of a potentially large and angry animal. But a whole guild could be corrupted too, deliberately under-measuring certain commodities on behalf of a consortium of buyers, say. That's why I propose a third layer of security. Perhaps one that would make our ancestors the most jealous. A perfect measuring apparatus. Making illusory rulers is all well and good, but they're temporary, and you need a spellcaster to hang around to use them. The far smarter thing to do is to build an actual physical ruler using the magically perfect illusory template as quality control. Such rulers would probably be expensive and made by master artisans, but they'd be perfectly accurate and fairly easily transportable, accurate to a machined level. In my view, every major guild hall would probably have a permanently installed 5-foot cube of something like etched glass with grid lines made onto it, templated specifically around a trusted illusionist's biggest possible illusion. This gridded glass, or just, a box made out of rulers, would probably be used to measure any small or medium-sized object that came through their doors. At that point, the only person you need to trust is the person who set up each guild's specific box, and if they're found not to correlate with others, well then they'll be in a whole load of trouble as a measurements fraud. But this all relies on two assumptions. First, that illusion magic is spatially limited in a magically perfect sense. Second, it assumes that illusionists are capable of creating magically and mathematically perfect constructions, and aren't just doing it by eye or doing it by vibes. If we assume that illusionists can't create perfectly spaced grids or perfectly spaced gradations in a ruler, say in an illusory ruler, then we're stuck with the 5-foot measurement being the only magically perfect one. If illusions are always a bit wishy-washy and a bit wobbly, then the 5-foot box is still a true measurement, but it's the only true measurement. And you need to do your gradations yourself using technical and artisanal skill. I mean, don't get me wrong though, having any fixed universal measurement in a world is an incredible logistics-changing boon. But if you've been world building in a non-gamified system, you might have found that last section a little dull and uninspiring. So here are all the other ways that illusion should be redefining how your civilization operates in fantasy worlds. First, communication. A big problem throughout history was that before you actually met someone in person, you had very little idea of what they were like or what they even looked like. Business associates, clandestine contacts, and perhaps most important, potential future spouses are all really quite important, critical to recognise and understand what they may actually look like if you're, say, meeting them for the first time. Eventually, the crowned heads of Europe resorted to commissioning paintings of their eligible bachelors and bachelorettes. I mean, how much easier is a quick illusionist's impression instead, as the illusionist can accompany any correspondence that is sent and give a brief flash of what the actual person corresponding looks like. It's also an artistic interpretation, but it's a lot faster than, getting out the canvas. In a similar vein, education. Key concepts are best articulated using a multimedia approach. But, as I mentioned earlier, parchment is at a premium. You could use slate and chalk or a clay tablet and stylus, but both of those methods take time, dexterity, and produce one-dimensional monochrome images. Heck, even if it's harder to use illusions to do this same thing, you still don't need to then carry any drawing supplies, or be limited to a school environment. A travelling educator can rock up in a town square and visually explain all the differences between orcs and goblins with no tools and no equipment except for an illusion. Speaking of identifying monsters, in worlds with illusion magic, the police sketch artist probably becomes a job far earlier than ever in our world, identifying which mushroom the kid who's frothing at the mouth ate, the facial features or clothes of a criminal, or which specific red monster was seen loitering near the temple, whether it was a hobgoblin or a devil. These are all very useful things, and a quick and dirty illusion is among the best ways, outside of, lugging around multiple encyclopedias and reference books, of getting a quick image of what a thing is and referencing it against local knowledge. But illusions aren't just good for social and interpersonal functions. Let's talk about hunting. Illusory sounds can easily spook or coerce prey towards your hidey hole so you can get them easier. Illusory air or foliage can hide your traps from suspicious animals' visual ranges. Likewise, an illusion can just hide a pit trap that you've dug with a blanket of completely normal grass, or a patch of lovely, tasty-looking food. My YouTube community also convinced me that, especially in hunting, sound is really king, though. Duck calls, mating calls, loud noises, they've all been used to shape prey behaviour for as long as we've been hunting as a species. Now imagine being able to do all of that from a distance solo. I mention my community here because a lot of these thoughts were developed and explained in greater detail on a live stream that I did. a few months back, which is available to watch at any time after the fact if you're a YouTube member specifically on this channel, as are in fact all of my past live streams. But never fear, you can catch my next live stream without being a member. It'll be next Tuesday, the day after my next video releases. We're going to be talking about Bullywug Society in honour of Fay Week, of course, which is a big YouTube event, which I'm also participating in. Monday's video is going to be a doozy for that result. The next thing I'd like to suggest is another idea that was mentioned on the live stream. Illusions that are supported in some way by real things, where reality and illusion can be integrated. This first came up with reference to a vision box, a small box with one viewing hole, one viewing angle, wherein an illusion can be placed and designed to be in perspective from that one angle, so that from that single angle, depth and scale can be achieved in such a way that would be impossible using a tiny illusion. It's kind of like VR glasses, I suppose. You could even use a box like this with a single point illusion built into it, but have the box have an open side at the other end of what you're viewing, so that your illusion then becomes a holographic augmented reality overlay to superimpose illusions on reality. This is an interior designer, surveyor or architect's dream. With some clever maths and some clever illusion shaping, you could absolutely use this method to visualize any number of ideas in situ at realistically any scale. We also talked earlier about the importance of seeing one's leaders in person, and this integrated illusion technology could be a great method in that vein too. Let's say each major settlement has a faceless statue of its monarch in the centre. Whenever a proclamation is made in the monarch's name, an illusionist stands by to project their monarch's face onto the statue. Perhaps even animating some hand movements using the statue's hand, or some lip flaps. Apply this projection-based animation of the physical world to anything, really, and you make it much more visually pleasing and impressive. It would be used across the arts. One final thought though, in reference to the arts and interacting with real materials as well, I'll leave you with an image of a sculptor using minor illusion to create his plan, to ideate and plan his sculpture, and then creating an illusion. An illusion that is entirely covered by the block of stone he's going to be using. An illusion of the broad outline of his sculpture within the stone itself. Basically, the stone carver can chip away at the stone with impunity, and as soon as he interacts with, or as soon as his illusion appears in view as he carves a little bit off, he knows he stops there and moves on to the next section, creating a rough shape, even if this illusion is very basic, a rough shape of his statue inside the statue itself as a guideline. There's nothing inherently tricksy about illusion magic. In fact, in the right hands, illusion magic should have a much better reputation than it does. It is among the most useful methods of visualization, precision making and planning that it is possible to have. It would even see use in our modern world. But with all that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the thegrungeonmaster. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Ideally, next week's video, because it's Monster Week and the theme is the Fae.